Welcome, friends. Welcome back to the kitchen. Welcome back to Stuff in Our Cupboard or Pandemic Pantry. Still March 2020, and through the comments section below, I've come to understand that a lot of people are having trouble finding pasta in the grocery store. I think the panic buying is pretty much over at this point. It's taking a little while for the stores to restock, and there's still a lot of people who are maybe afraid to go to the grocery store to get the staples, and that's fine. Totally understand that. So I thought I'd just do a simple pasta recipe. But a pasta recipe isn't that simple because there's going to be a lot of people who argue over the finer points of making pasta. And there are some finer points of making pasta around the type of flour you use. I'm just going to use all-purpose this time just because I know that everybody's got all-purpose flour in their kitchen right now, or many people have all-purpose flour in their kitchen right now. I mean, it comes down to there is a specific 00 flour for making pasta, and I have some of that, but I'm not going to use it. You can also use different types of durum semolina flour, which is a coarse grain flour that makes a great pasta. Let's just break it down. Let's make it as simple as possible. Don't overthink it. You've got 3 ingredients: flour, a little bit of salt, and 3 eggs. So I'm going to put the eggs in, and I'm going to do it in a food processor. The whole thing on the countertop, you know, with the eggs in the well, fantastic theater. It really is fantastic theater. I shot in a Michelin-starred Italian restaurant, probably around 2008. Shot with the chef as he made pasta, and he did all of that theater. And as we were shooting, you know, when the camera's not rolling, because I was shooting for somebody else. It wasn't for this channel. You know, I would talk to the chef and say, you know, is this the way you make it? What are the finer points? And he laughed, and he pointed to this giant machine in the corner of the kitchen and said, no, one of the guys makes the pasta in that machine over there. And he goes, if I ever make pasta at home, I do it in a food processor. So it looks fantastic, but, you know, totally unnecessary. And if they're not doing it in a Michelin-starred restaurant, this will be good enough for us. So everything gets whacked into the food processor. We're going to turn it on and let it process. Now this is the art part of cooking. I've made this recipe by volume. So a couple of cups of flour, 3 eggs. You might need to adjust the amount of liquid that's in there because 3 large eggs where I live are going to be different than 3 large eggs where you live. Even within a carton of eggs here, 3 large eggs are different sizes. So you can adjust that level with a little bit of olive oil, and you just squirt it in and it'll come together. About a tablespoon of oil, and if you don't have olive oil, you could use any oil, and if you don't want to use any oil, you could just spoon in a tablespoon of water, maybe drizzle in a little bit of extra. It comes together into a ball, and you can leave it in the food processor and let it do part of the kneading for you. But at this point, I'm going to pull it out. I'm going to pull it out and put it onto the bench. So, a little bit of flour onto the bench. Doesn't take much. You don't need a whole lot. And out comes the pasta dough. And I will just finish kneading it by hand. I pretty much always finish kneading stuff like this by hand. Gives me a better sense of what it feels like. Feel and touch is a big part of cooking. And I know the first time you make it, you're going to say, well, I don't know what it's supposed to feel like. And you won't. But it will become obvious fairly shortly once you're doing it. And then the second time you do it, it'll be like second nature. Okay, so I'm going to clear most of this flour away because I don't need it. And I'm just going to knead this until a nice, smooth, elastic ball happens, which won't take long at all. Okay, this is looking really good at this point. And kneading it, I mean, you don't have to use a specific technique right off the bat, but I push it out like that, turn it, fold it back over, push it out, turn it, fold it over, push it out. And once I see that when I push it out, it's not cracking here at the front, I say it's pretty much done. So at this point, we wrap it up. Piece of plastic wrap, wrap it as tightly as possible, and you leave it on the counter for at least an hour. When you read recipes for making pasta on the internet, you're going to see people tell you everything from an hour to 8 hours to 12 hours to, it just goes on and on and on. At least an hour gets you where you want to be. If you want to make this today and cook it tomorrow or roll it out tomorrow, stick it in the fridge. And you can leave it in the fridge for, I would say, 2 days. You should use it up before 2 days have gone past. So I'm going to leave this on the counter, let it rest for an hour, and then we'll roll it out. Okay, a little bit of flour out on the bench. You don't need too much. Now, if you have a pasta machine, obviously you're going to use a pasta machine. And if you have a pasta machine, you probably didn't need to watch this video because you've already made pasta and you know what you're doing. A little bit of flour out on the bench. I'm just going to use a rolling pin because that's really all you need. Pasta machine is fantastic, but not strictly necessary. And I would also suggest that you only roll out as much dough as you plan to eat today. It's much easier to wrap this back up, keep it in the fridge, and roll it out when you need it. It will keep much better. So, into the fridge with this half. Don't need it today. And if you watched the video we put out a couple days ago on making pierogies, you're going to see that up to this point, it's pretty much the same thing. The dough really isn't much different between this pasta dough and the pierogi dough. And if you wanted to, you could use them relatively interchangeably. They come from the same place. A lot of food, as you start to look at food around the world, you can start to see that they come from the same place, and then they may diverge in points based on geography, based on what the people had, where the recipe ended up. So there's really not that much difference between a pierogi and a ravioli, just what's in the filling. So we're going to roll this out. Use whatever you have for a rolling pin, and don't be afraid to pick up the dough and move it around. It is very pliable. It's not going to rip and tear, or it shouldn't rip and tear. Now, you see how the dough is pulling back on itself and is not really rolling out very nicely? That just means that the gluten needs to relax. So don't be afraid to just cover it over with a tea towel and let it rest for 10, 15 minutes and then come back and continue rolling. And if you need to do that 2 or 3 times, do it 2 or 3 times. It's not a big deal. It just means that maybe you didn't knead it enough at the beginning, you didn't develop enough gluten, and it hasn't rested enough in that hour-long rest period. Okay, so depending on what you're going to do with this, you can roll it thinner or thicker. If you're going to make raviolis or something, you want to have it a little bit thinner. If you're going to make just plain old spaghetti or fettuccine, roll it a little bit thicker. Completely up to you, depending on what your use is. I'm crazy enough. I'm actually going to make a tuna casserole to use up some canned goods. So, not necessarily the right pasta for tuna casserole. Not necessarily the right pasta for tuna casserole at all. But that's what I have to do. You have to do what you have to do. I mean, it's March 2020. The world is a little bit crazy. So, I'm going to roll it up. And not tight. Just sort of roll it over. Put down a cutting board, and I'm just going to use a knife to cut it. And you just take your knife and you cut them as wide or narrow as you want. It is your pasta. And there you go, pasta noodle. So I'm going to slice this into, I'm going to slice these into lengths about like that to use it in the tuna casserole. But, I mean, you could cut them as narrow, as long, as thin as you want. It's up to you depending on your use, like I said. So, fresh pasta really is pretty easy. You cook this in salted boiling water the same as you would cook any other pasta, but it takes a lot less time to cook. It's almost dip it in, take it out sort of thing. Don't make it harder than it needs to be. This is not a time to be overthinking things. You can just make it work. And if the pasta starts sticking together, just, you know, sprinkle a little bit of flour on top, not too much. And there you go. Check out the tuna casserole video coming up. Thanks for stopping by. Stay safe, stay healthy. See you again soon.